My name is Heather Forsgren-Weaver, and I'm the Vice Chair of the National Press Club's Book and Author Committee. And I'd like to welcome you all and thank you all for coming tonight to tonight's book wrap featuring Richard Belzer and his New York Times best-selling book, Hit List, an in-depth investigation into the mysterious deaths of witnesses to the JFK assassination. Mr. Belzer will be signing only books purchased tonight because it's a fundraiser for the National Press Club's Journalism Institute. So if you haven't bought your book yet, now would be a really good time to go out and get it. Before we begin, I've got a couple of housekeeping items we have to take care of. First of all, everybody take their cell phone out, make sure it's on silent. And now that everybody has silenced their cell phones so we don't have any interruptions later, let me tell you about a few of our upcoming book wraps. Buzz Aldrin plans to be here this Friday to discuss his book, Mission to Mars, My Vision for Space Exploration. Jessica Buchanan and Eric Lanmom are scheduled to be here on May 22nd to discuss Impossible Odds, the kidnapping of Jessica Buchanan and her dramatic rescue by SEAL Team 6. Walter Cronkite's grandson, Walter Cronkite IV, and Morris Isserman plan to be here on June 4th to discuss Cronkite's War, his World War II letters home. And last but certainly not least, on June 19th, we have scheduled Steve Barry for his new book, The King's Deception. If you are interested in receiving email notifications about upcoming book wraps, please sign up outside at the front table. Tonight's program will be structured as follows. I will introduce Mr. Belzer. He will speak for about 20 minutes, and then we will have a question and answer session before he signs the books. Okay, I'm done with the housekeeping. For more than 20 years, Richard Belzer has been known to most of us as Sergeant John Munch of Law & Order Special Victims Unit and Homicide Life on the Street. Mr. Belzer, or Sergeant Munch, has also appeared on a record-setting 10 different TV series, including The X-Files and Sesame Street. Before becoming Sergeant Munch, Belzer portrayed an LAPD detective on a Very Brady sequel and had other acting roles. Mr. Belzer is also a well-known stand-up comedian. But even after writing a whole slew of books, one might ask, can he write? The answer is most definitely yes, because before he was Sergeant Munch or a stand-up comedian, Mr. Belzer was a reporter for the Bridgeport, Connecticut Post and other Connecticut newspapers. So as one reporter to another, I am pleased to welcome Richard Belzer to the National Press Club.
Dick Gregory, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Just to see Greg alone is worth the price of admission, don't you think? One of the most important, not just performer, but activists and advocates, and along with Lenny Bruce and Mort Saul, Mr. Gregory has redefined what comedy can do, and besides make us laugh. It can inform us, it can educate us, and it can make us think about who we are and how we treat other people, and still function as one of the funniest people. So that is one of the great gifts that Dick has, and he's partially responsible, don't arrest him, for me being in show business. He inspired me very early on. I'll just recall one story. The first time I saw Mr. Gregory was indelibly imprinted on the emotion sheet of my mind. He came out on stage. This is on television. Came out, sat on a stool, lit up a cigarette, and said, "If you don't laugh, I may move in next door to you." And that was in the 50s. So not only do we laugh at that, But it's a revelatory joke. It's a joke that gives us, we all can have an epiphany about that joke because he told the truth, he made us laugh, and he made us think. And for that, we are forever grateful to Dick Gregory. I'm going to dare and talk about something he knows more about than I do, but you can school me if I'm wrong. Okay, there are those in positions of power who malign the pursuit of justice by intentionally associating the word conspiracy with the delirious hallucinations of unbalanced minds. Well, they're wrong. The real-world definition of conspiracy is simple: two or more persons agreeing to commit a crime. In short, they are everywhere, a constant component of daily events throughout our history, and are by no means the restless imaginings of an over-attentive audience. Now, I'm going to throw in some quotes here that I like. There was a book called Farewell America, written under a pseudonym by James Hepburn, which some people think was written by French intelligence. Right there? This is the quote from that book. President Kennedy's assassination was the work of magicians. It was a stage trick, complete with accessories and fake mirrors, and when the curtain fell, the actors and even the scenery disappeared. The plotters were correct when they guessed that their crime would be concealed by shadows and silence that would be blamed on a madman and negligence. I'm going to read from my own works now, because I got to earn my book hit list. By the way, I just found out yesterday, made the New York Times bestseller list. Thank you. And the reason I mention is my last book, Dead Wrong, also made the New York Times bestseller list, and the New York Times does not review my books. So if I may say, fuck the New York Times. Pardon my French. Okay, we all know this is the 50th anniversary of the murder of our president. And one thing I feel that people lose sight of with the assassination and all the myths and theories, and a man died that day. And I think a lot of people lose sight of the fact. It's become almost like a pop culture thing. JFK, the grassy knoll, lone gunman. There are these catchphrases that diminish and marginalize the depth, the complexity, and the true meaning of what it meant to have our president's head exploded in broad daylight, and they got away with it. So I'm going to read from some of my stuff. Very little from the new book, because you got to buy the new book. Where were you on November 22nd, 1963? I can remember where I was, and I can prove it. I have witnesses. And unlike many of the men and women who had inadvertently become witnesses in Dallas that day, my witnesses are still alive. You see, the very moment snipers were busy making Jack Kennedy's wish come true, because Jack Kennedy had said, it would be easy to shoot me from with a high-powered rifle from an office building. He actually said that because someone was worried about him. He said, hey, if they want to get me, they'll get me. So he knew. So the very moment these snipers were busy making Jack Kennedy's wish come true, I was taking aim on a grassy knoll behind the gymnasium at Dean Junior College. I was in college, I was in archery class, and I was shooting a bow and arrow. This is all true, by the way. You don't have to make anything up in this world, do you? Valerie Pellucci was watching me, this girl, and I was trying to impress Valerie Pellucci's breasts. The rest of Valerie didn't exist for me at that age. Nothing else existed. I always directed all of my communication skills directly at her breasts. Anyway, it was my turn to shoot, and just as I was pulling the bow back, the president of the student body ran out and said, Belz, the president's been shot. My body tensed, and I instinctively released the arrow. I'm lucky I didn't hit one of Valerie Pellucci's breasts. I guess she was lucky, too. I also missed the target, just the same way we all missed the target about who shot JFK. Most of the country worshipped Jack the way I worshipped Valerie Pellucci's breasts. They both symbolized our hopes for the future. In case you have a clear memory of where you were on the 22nd at 63, but you're a little murky on what else happened that day, here's a clue. Izmir. Okay. Fuck Steve Jobs, this thing's not working. Okay. All right, the President of the United States was killed by rifle fire while riding in an open car in broad daylight. It was an event witnessed by hundreds, but investigated by a panel of 7 men, none of whom was anywhere near Dallas that day, and it was decided that Kennedy was assassinated by a lone nut, Lee Harvey Oswald, who was, among other things, not an agent of the U.S. government. The Commission felt compelled to throw that factoid in. Not that there was any reason to suspect that Oswald had links to the federal government or anything, but in fact, newly released information in Oswald's 201 file reveals that he was involved in espionage for the CIA and apparently the FBI was paying him $200 a month as an informant. The FBI reported to the Commission that Oswald fired 3 shots at the target. The first bullet hit the president below the shoulder and penetrated less than the distance of a finger length. The second bullet struck Governor Connolly. The third bullet struck the president's head and fragmentized. The Commission, however, did not accept all the details of the FBI report. Oswald was later shot and killed by another lone nut, Dallas nightclub owner. There was no conspiracy. Case closed. Thank you and good night. But the case is only closed if you ignore the evidence. And this is where it gets really interesting. Okay. My book, Hit List, is about 50 witnesses to the JFK assassination who mysteriously died. Now, when we say mysteriously died, we mean someone who was about to testify before the House Select Committee on Assassinations is found chopped up in a barrel floating off the Key Biscayne Bay. Another person who was under house arrest was shot in the back and then 5 times around the mouth. They were going to testify the next day. Dorothy Kilgallen, a great reporter who was the only person to interview Jack Ruby alone. There were other reporters around, but she managed to get in a room. She was working on the case. She was a really good reporter. You may know her from What's My Line, but she was really a great reporter in addition to being a celebrity. And she told her best friend, her agent, and 2 other people that she was going to blow the lid off the case, that she had explosive information. And she also said that the FBI would be better served finding out who killed our president than harassing me. She was found dead in a bed in her apartment. Now, the bed she was found in was a guest room bed, not the bed she sleeps in. She had all her makeup on. And ladies, we know we don't take off our makeup and go to sleep. We do. So all her makeup was on, her false eyelashes. She was wearing something that she never wore to bed. They had a book on her. She had a book on her lap that she had already read, and her eyeglasses were nowhere to be found. And they said the official verdict was she died of an overdose of alcohol and barbiturates. The problem is they found 3 different kinds of barbiturates in her, so that means there were 2 barbiturates that she did not have access to. She was murdered. Her best friend, who she told about all this stuff, 2 days later, mysteriously dies. All her notes and all her things go missing. The list of strange deaths in the wake of the Kennedy assassination is a long one, but with bizarre and disturbing implications. Even a cursory examination of this list forces us to ask if these deaths were coincidence or consequence. Warren Commission member Hale Boggs, he was a congressman, he's Cokie Roberts' father, congressman from Louisiana, had this to say about the so-called magic bullet. I have strong doubts about it. Boggs then received a package of damaging dirt on the private lives of Warren Report critics from FBI Director Hoover, prompting Boggs to charge the FBI is using Gestapo tactics. Boggs further accused the FBI of tapping his and other congressmen's telephones. Well, guess what? Shortly before, his plane disappeared without a trace somewhere in Alaska. Oh, this is a little fact that you might not even know. You know who drove Hale Boggs to the airport that day? Bill Clinton. He was a campaign worker. I'm not saying anything. All right, now, there's some very curious, this is the greatest murder mystery of all time. This is Arthur Conan Doyle on speed. This is an amazing, amazing story when you consider all the characters involved and all the levels of plausible deniability and the way the cover-up was almost bigger than the crime. A lot of people don't realize that people involved in the cover-up weren't involved in the murder. They covered it up out of institutional embarrassment. People in our government said, holy shit, people in our government killed our president. So, and it's the height of the Cold War, so they had to circle their wagons and partake in the cover-up. That was 50 years ago, during the height of the Cold War, as I said, and I think some people were genuinely patriotic and meant well by covering it up because we didn't want the world to think we were a banana republic and we could shoot our president in broad daylight. So people did cover it up in the press and in the government, but that's 50 years ago. There's no reason to cover it up anymore. We know who the plotters are. They're all dead. Some of the shooters are still alive and in jail. This is what makes me very angry, is that the patronization and the contempt for the American public. The Kennedy assassination is one of the ghostliest parts of our history. If you go to any history book in any town in this country and you open it up, John Kennedy was killed by Lee Harvey Oswald, next paragraph. That to me is very, very disturbing because for 50 years, very diligent, of course there's crackpots, of course there's crazy people. I mean, the president was murdered, it's going to attract moths to a flame. But there have been incredibly responsible people, scholars, and professors and activists who've taken this very seriously and have investigated it and keep investigating it. As a matter of fact, the Zapruder film was not seen for 13 years. Can you imagine what it would have been like if that film was shown the day after Jack Kennedy's murder? I think a lot of things would be different. They sat on it for 13 years, and it took the diligence and the persistence of Mr. Dick Gregory, who got Robert Groden, who was an investigator for the House Select Committee on Assassination. He was a photographic expert. And Dick got the film and showed it on Good Night America, a Geraldo Rivera show, and the audience gasped, as we all would have if we saw it, but it was 13 years later. So they sat on that for 13 years, and as I'm sure Dick will agree, we don't even know what version of that film that was, because some people have said that there are frames repeated and that the film's been doctored. But we can't get caught up in the minutia. It doesn't matter if the Zapruder film existed or not. I mean, it shows the president's, going back and all that. But there's a lot more stuff that will prevent us from getting lost in the weeds, as we say. There was a white Russian communist with links to the CIA. George de Mohrenschildt was a Russian engineer, a Nazi during World War II. One day he just shows up at Lee's house, and befriends Lee Oswald in Dallas, and later stated Lee is innocent. De Mohrenschildt was a friend of George Bush Sr. Hours before he was to be interviewed by assassination investigator Gaetan Fonzi, de Mohrenschildt allegedly committed suicide with a 20-gauge shotgun. Now, what's interesting about that is de Mohrenschildt's wife used to watch soap operas, but she wasn't going to be home that day, so she had an audio recorder to tape the audio of it. And on that tape, you hear a beep, 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 which means that their security system in the house was breached. And then you hear footsteps, and then you hear the explosion of the gun. He did not commit suicide. His widow didn't buy it. They may get me too, she said. I think Oswald was a CIA agent, but he didn't kill Kennedy. Something's being covered up. And then it gets down to Marilyn Moon, who was, her name was Delilah. She was a stripper, employed at Jack Ruby's Carousel Club at the time of the JFK snuff. Walt, what is it, baby? Come here. Is that my dog? Come here. It's okay. It's okay. I'm right here. It's okay. Couché. No, he's all right. He just wants to make sure I'm not leaving. Delilah was found shot to death on September 1st, 1966. She had planned to write an inside knowledge book about the assassination. Car salesman Albert Guy Bogard claimed that Lee Harvey Oswald test drove a vehicle shortly before the Kennedy hit, zooming along the Stemmons Freeway at 75 miles an hour. By the way, Oswald couldn't drive. That was another Oswald. He was clearly set up. There was at least 2 Oswalds. That's in the public domain. That's not crazy conspiracy stuff. When Oswald wasn't in the country, there was a guy here saying he was Oswald, going to firing ranges and shooting at other people's targets and making a spectacle of himself to set Oswald up. Anyone who had any foreknowledge of the murder was eventually murdered, including CIA agents, FBI agents, police officers. I think one of the most tragic, probably, well, that's hard to say, but Roger Craig, who was a police officer in Dallas. 15 minutes after the shots were fired, he saw someone run out of the back of the school book depository, and someone in a Rambler station wagon whistled, and the person ran and got in the car, and they drove off. And Roger Craig, the officer, tried to cross the street to see what was going on, but there was just too much traffic. The person he saw getting into the Rambler was Lee Harvey Oswald. The other person he said was a Negro, maybe he was, a Afro-Cuban, but a dark-complected man. So he saw someone who looked exactly like Lee Harvey Oswald 15 minutes after the shooting run off and get in the car and drive off. And so when they were interrogating Oswald, by the way, they destroyed virtually everything he said, but some of the things he said are on record. And in fact, this is very interesting. All right, since Roger Craig seeing Oswald run out, this made a mash of Oswald's alleged bus and taxi escape route. You know the story of how Oswald, he got on a bus, then he got in the taxi, and then he went home, and then he got a gun, he shot Tippit. It's pretty amazing stuff. Escape route. All right, so Fritz asks, this is another officer, says to Oswald, now what about this car? Because Roger Craig had mentioned it. And this is what Oswald said. He said, that station wagon belongs to Mrs. Payne. Don't try to tie her into this. Now what the fuck does that mean? Ruth Payne and her husband were government operatives, we now know. Ruth Payne was already involved as a friend of the de Mohrenschilds, who took Marina Oswald and the child into her home while Lee made his infamous New Orleans trip. And she also said they found Lee's rifle. She said she saw his rifle in her house. Anyway, she's very fishy, to say the least. And it just goes on and on. And the other Oswalds, there are some researchers that say there are 60 Oswalds or 30 Oswalds or 10 Oswalds or 2 Oswalds. Here's what's important about this. In the late 50s, our government was sending Marines and Army servicemen to Russia as fake defectors. And we had a program to send people over there to pretend they were defecting and then become spies or whatever. Now, the Russians aren't stupid. They may, have a weird idea of how to govern, but they tagged every one of them. They knew who they all were, and they knew Oswald was, in fact, sent over there, and he got a job. He got an apartment overlooking a river, and a job at a radio factory, which Russians would have to wait years to get. So they were on to him. They kept an eye on him, or at least that one. And but how can a lone nut act alone when there's a half a dozen of them? Well, let's check out just a few of the many. Okay, the man that was arrested for assassinating Kennedy and murdering Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit, he's dead now, but they told us he was Lee Harvey Oswald. The problem is, they also said Oswald posed for each of these photos. There are pictures of Oswald, headshots of Oswald from when he was in the Army, from when he was younger, from when he was arrested, and it's clearly a couple of different people. There's just no, a sharp high school kid could tell you that. Because Oswalds were doing one thing while one Oswald was in another place. So, and then the picture of him on the cover of Life magazine, which pretty much indicted him in the press. Oswald knew that was fake. He worked in a high-tech, what was it, Styles? he got some curious jobs. He was at a base in Atsugi in Japan that had the flight plans of the U-2 spy planes that were shot down over Russia. And Gary Powers, the pilot of that plane, said that mentioned Lee Harvey Oswald. Of course, he died in a mysterious helicopter crash. What was his name, that pilot? Gary Powers, yes. So I'm just looking through my notes here. There's just so many. Then Oswald pretended to be pro-Castro, but he was actually hanging out with the white Russian fascist community in the southwest of Texas. A lot of people don't realize that about 1 million Russians joined the Nazis, the white Russian community, so-called. And that's who Oswald was hanging out with, people that hated communists and hated Kennedy. So he was pretending, setting up, unbeknownst to him, his patsy story. But what I'd like to do now, I could go on for years here, obviously. There's just so much. But you may wonder why I'm involved in this. I mean, like you, I have a beautiful wife, a house in France, and a hit TV show. We're all the same. So why would I be interested in this? Actually, I have to go back to my roots as a reporter, a newspaper reporter. And as a kid, I got thrown out of every school I ever went to, literally thrown out. They threw me out of yeshiva. Okay, they said, you know what? Eat pork, go pray to Minnie Pearl, get out of here. So that really flabbergasted my parents when the rabbis couldn't kick my ass. They just figured this kid is hopeless. So what I'd like to do now is open it up for questions. We have questions?
Yeah.
And you read them and then I respond? Wow.
Actually,
Whatever you need, baby, I can read them.
actually, we're going to allow people to stand up.
Oh, okay.
The beautiful Bea Snyder has a microphone, so if you'll raise your hand, she will bring you the microphone. However,
Yeah.
she's under strict orders if you start
Now, this is a very
speechifying.
smart audience. They're going to ask quick, succinct questions,
Exactly.
right?
But if they don't, she'll yank it back, and I'll stand up here and snarl.
I'm sure we'll be okay. All right?
I'm fairly loud. Should I take the microphone?
We need the microphone.
Oh, no problem. Thanks. De Morenschild
Yes.
quoted as saying that Oswald spoke flawless Russian, which seems implausible for a short time. Do you believe that's true, or was that a setup?
Well, as I said, there were 2 Oswalds at least. One of them was very smart. He went to the Monterey, he learned Russian in Monterey, at which is now a military language school. He worked in a very sophisticated photographic house, company. In his notebook, they found the term microdots, which in 1963, not many people would be using that term. They also found a Minox camera, which in those days was called a spy camera and was not available to the general public. De Morenschild is a very curious, strange cat who actually wrote a book saying that Oswald was innocent after that. But he was a buddy of George Bush Sr. and was pro-Nazi. And the unfortunate thing about our government is after World War II, we brought a lot of Nazis into our country thinking that, these German scientists can help us. And unfortunately, we didn't know that Kim Philby, the English double agent, who was a communist sympathizer, but he was an English spy. And after World War II, when we were so-called repatriating Nazis and getting them, we wanted these scientists. So did the English. So did the Russians. We did not know that Kim Philby was a communist agent, double agent. So he sent all the really smart, good, not good, but good with a small g, the really expert scientists went to Russia and they went to England. And we got the lowest dregs of the Nazi. These people were allowed to subvert the will of the Nuremberg trials. Allen Dulles, who was on the Warren Commission, who Jack Kennedy fired throughout the 1930s, helped English and American bankers invest in Germany because Teddy Roosevelt, this gets deep. Are you ready to go deep? Teddy Roosevelt was against big business, as we all know, and he actually put through legislation that would prevent cartels and things like that. And he was known as a person who was allergic to big business. And because of that, the Harrimans, the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, Jack Kennedy's father, Prescott Bush, all the wealthiest families in this country started investing in the German stock market, because in Germany in the 20s you could have cartels and conglomerates. So the richest families in America are more than 50% responsible for our depression, because they took all their money out of this country and put it in Germany. Now, Hitler comes along, they're still fine with it. Dulles is in Switzerland with his brother, John Foster, answering the phone, Heil Hitler, helping the Germans, helping English bankers and American bankers. In fact, Standard Oil, Chase Bank were helping the Germans throughout the war. And in fact, I'm jumping around here, but it's interesting because there were 200 English and Americans who stayed in Germany throughout the war to help the Germans, to help the Nazis. They were arrested. They were brought to a prison that was called Ashcan Dustbin, was the code name for it. And John Loftus is a great writer. His friend was a guard in this prison. And one of these American bankers was said to this guard, I'll be out of here in a few days. My friends at Chase will get me out of here. And the guard said, this guy's nuts. Sure enough, a week later, they were all released. Now, this is important because FDR wanted German bankers to go on trial in Nuremberg for financing the Holocaust. But the German bankers told our Justice Department before they went to trial, hey, we were just doing what the American bankers told us to do. So they couldn't indict them because they found out that the American banks, the English banks, and the Nazis and the Dulles brothers were helping them figure out how to move the money around so that after the war criminals were let free. People who committed acts of treason were allowed to go free because of the embarrassment, because of the banking ties. Allen Dulles should have been hung for treason because he continued to do business with the Nazis throughout the war. And then when Hitler turned, he wasn't a good dog. You know, like Noriega was a good dog, and then we had to get rid of him. And Hussein, he was a good dog, got rid of him. And Bin Laden, you notice how this happens? We enlist these people to help us get resources out of their country, and then we knock them off if they don't play right. But the Dulles brothers were geniuses at helping the Nazis and helping, there's a great book I recommend called The Arabists about the State Department during World War II and right after, and how they fell in love with oil and how they prevented, and this almost, Allen Dulles is responsible for denying, for making it impossible for thousands and thousands of Jews to escape Germany because he didn't want them going to the Middle East and upsetting the Arabs that we were going in business with. It was all about oil and money and anti-Semitism. And it's pretty disturbing stuff, but, you know, here we are. I'm sorry, I do go on, don't I? I'm sorry. But I think it's important that we know who we are so we know what to do.
Hi. Is it true that they lost President Kennedy's brain during the autopsy? I've heard about this. And,
yeah.
And secondly,
yes.
Do you have an overarching conclusion as to exactly what happened with the assassination and why?
I'll try to answer both questions. In fact, the president's brain did go missing, and some people theorize that it would show trajectory and you know, it would dismiss the single bullet theory. But the president's head was surgically altered before he got to Bethesda. Between Parkland Hospital and Bethesda, the president had surgery done on his head to disguise the wound, so they really had to try and find a way to have it come from behind, which is clearly impossible. Now, to answer your question in part, let's get this straight. Lee Harvey Oswald, not only did he not shoot the president, he didn't fire a shot. He was on the first floor having lunch. He went up to the second floor and got a Coke. He was seen at 12:23 or 24 by 3 different people One was a pregnant woman who had to go to the bathroom. I think her last name is Arnold, Mrs. Arnold. She had to, you know, as we know, she had to go to the bathroom every 20 minutes or so. She saw Lee in the lunchroom at like 12:24 or something, and Lee Harvey Oswald, that one, named two people that were in the lunchroom. One guy was named Junior, and the other guy, he didn't know his name. It was two black gentlemen who worked in the building. He couldn't have guessed, so Oswald was there. And then, this is at 12:23, 12:24, and then he goes up to the second floor and gets a Coke, and he's seen calmly drinking it by Roy Truly, the manager of the building, and Officer Marion Baker. Now, so they had to prove that he could fire these 3 shots, wipe off the rifle, go across. I've been in the depository, and I've retraced these steps as much as I could, because some things are cut off now. But in most books that don't believe in a conspiracy, they say Oswald, you know, went across the depository, the 6th floor, to the door. Well, there were stacks of books there, so he would have had to go around them. The rifle that he ostensibly used was found wedged behind boxes. I'm telling you all this for a reason. And then he supposedly fires off 3 shots. First shot, there's a tree in the way, can't see. Somehow he does that. And the 2 of the shots came so close together that it would be physically impossible for the rifle to do that. But keep in mind, I'm telling you, Oswald didn't fire any shots. So if he did, it means that he would have had to fire the 3 shots. Now, when you fire this rifle, you shoot it, but you have to sight it again. So that's time. They're saying that 6 seconds, he fired 3 shots. That's physically impossible, too, and the reason I know that is because the greatest marksman in the world couldn't do it. I quote him in my last book. As CBS hired 19 sharpshooters. One guy kind of did it, but his rifle was locked down on a tripod. So it's just, impossible. So Oswald was seen on the 2nd floor by Officer Baker. Now, Officer Baker was driving his motorcycle. He's an ex-military man. He heard shots from the roof of the depository, from up and behind him. He parked his motorcycle, ran into the depository, ran up the 1st flight of stairs, running so fast he bumped into the back of Roy Truly, the manager of the building, and they got to the 2nd floor. Officer Baker sees through a glass wall, a window or whatever. He sees this guy standing there calmly with a Coke in his hand, has his gun out. And Roy Truly said, he's okay, he works here. And then they went up another flight of stairs. Now that to me, just to stop for a second, how many times have you seen a cop go, all right, everybody move? You're supposed to say, nobody move. Anyway, so the Warren Commission said, okay, it was possible for this to happen in 90 to 95 seconds. This is very important, because that's what they based it on. Now, for Oswald to have gone, let's say he was on the 2nd floor and not the 1st floor and going up and came down, whatever. Let's say he's at the window. He fires the 3 shots, and somehow the shells from that rifle landed right next to each other. Now, he goes across the floor, wipes the rifle, and wedges it behind the books, and then goes down the 4 flights. It's actually 8 flights. It's 4 flights with landings. And the door to open it is very heavy. So we're talking about seconds here, and seconds are important. So if Oswald did what they said he did, he would have been down on the 2nd floor in 60 seconds, which is physically impossible. He could not have physically done it. That alone proves a lot. Now you asked me who killed Kennedy, is that whatever? I say who didn't kill him. No, I'm not, that's glib, but he was going to change the Federal Reserve System. He was going to change the way oil magnates got billions of dollars in tax breaks. He had the first nuclear test ban treaty with Russia. He wanted, the day he was shot, he had a Swiss diplomat, I believe, talking to Castro about cooling that out. He had Martin Luther King in the White House, which drove people crazy in the South. Dallas was a hotbed of racism, rabid anti-communism. I'm an anti-communist, by the way, as Gore Vidal used to say. not meaning I'm a communist, but meaning I'm against this shrill communist under every bed. We spent trillions of dollars on borrowed money against an empire in decline. Russia was never the threat that we made it out to be. So who killed them? It's elements within our government, elements within the mob. As we know now, the CIA hired Johnny Roselli and Sam Giancana to figure out a way to kill Castro. So that's an executive action. In 1963, the American people didn't know that our government was whacking other world leaders. We were floating false currency to screw up other governments' economy. We were poisoning crops. It was, nobody could handle that in 1963. Again, so it was, the reason the cover-up was so gigantic is because people in the government realized, holy shit, somebody in the government killed the president. We got to cover it up. So we now know the names of the people in the CIA, in the FBI, and in the mob who were involved in the murder. And you have to buy some books to find out. But no, but seriously, all the plotters are dead. And some of the shooters may be in jail. So there's no reason, there's no national security reason, there's just no reason not to tell the full story. It's, again, I think, contempt for us, the American people. Yes? Mademoiselle.
I don't even need a mic. Is the cover-up still deadly, and do you have concerns?
Not. I wish I was joking. Fortunately, being a celebrity, I have a lot of friends in the government, and I have a friend who, I can't name anyone, but I'm telling you the truth, who's in the Secret Service. And I was visiting the White House some years ago when I had another book I was writing about the Kennedy assassination. And my wife said, should we be worried about any of this? And I said, I don't know. So I asked my friend, and this is what he said. He said, they won't kill you. They won't kill you. In other words, they do kill people, but they won't kill me. Because I'm an actor, and they can marginalize me, and like the New York Times won't review my book. No, really, they don't. And I make their bestseller list. And they still marginalize people who are, it's easy to marginalize people that question authority, because most people don't want to know that their government did an awful thing, or that their parents did an awful thing, or that their priest or rabbi did an awful thing. So when we start implicating the government, not as an institution, but elements within it, it takes people, it affects their brain. And it's true. If something happens, I've had discussions with highly intelligent people, and I've told them undeniable truths, and they just couldn't wrap their head around it. So I think there's a psychological element to that, but that's another book. Yes, sir. Oh, sorry. Next, sir. No, this woman's here, and then. Sorry. Well, white lady first, man. Come on, it's the United States, man. Come on. Yes, ma'am.
Well, then I'll make them very quick. First of all, thank you both for coming. I have one quick question that's off topic for you, and then both for one of you. One question. They're both for rumors. Rumor is, number one, were you really brought up in Fairfield, Connecticut?
Bridgeport.
Okay, me too.
I graduated from high school in Fairfield.
All right.
Thrown out.
Because I think we went to the same high school. Okay, second thing for both of you is Kennedy assassination, Bobby Kennedy assassination, any corollaries?
Well, of course. They were both murdered by more than, and brothers. Bobby had said, Senator Robert Kennedy had said, the only way he could find out who killed his brother is to become president. And so that's what happened to him. And as a matter of fact, the first call he made was to John McCone of the CIA, and he said, you bastards killed my brother. So Bobby had a target on his back from day one. Yes, sir.
What's your opinion of the video series, The Men Who Killed Kennedy?
Oh, yeah, Nigel Turner. Yeah, that's from the 90s, I believe. A lot of that stuff is really good. I mean, the problem with the murder is that it's 50 years. There's thousands of books and lectures and documentaries and articles. And, I've been wading through this stuff since, I don't know, at least 40 years. So yeah, that was an important and a very good series, and it's a great stepping off point. If you're intrigued by some of the stuff they cover, then you can go further. I highly recommend you don't take even me, at face value. Don't take anyone's word at face value. Believe me. Yes. Yes.
You probably know that on Wednesday there's going to be whistleblowers, eyewitnesses coming forward to testify around Benghazi and the murder of the Ambassador Stevens. Do you think there's any connection between the cover-up of Benghazi 9/11 and the assassination?
No. I think that Benghazi is one of the, first of all, a lot of people don't understand. President Obama, whatever we think, whatever our political persuasion, President Obama was told by generals in our army and by NATO just to do a no-fly zone over Libya, over Benghazi. And President Obama said, well, wait a minute, they're going in with tanks and artillery and troops. A no-fly zone is meaningless. So to make a long story short, President Obama defied the generals, as Jack Kennedy learned to do, and saved 1 million people. 1 million Libyans were saved because of the president. As a matter of fact, 10 Libyans died trying to protect our ambassador because he was a real ambassador. He was in the street. He was helping, neighborhoods and relations between our country and Libya. The Libyans loved him, and it's a very, very, it's very, very seductive to try and tie all this stuff together. I don't think there's one big grand conspiracy in the world. I think there's a lot of sharks, multinational bankers, oil, whatever, that just go along, and every once in a while they have a common interest, and they get together and say, this guy's got to die, or we got to invade this country. But a lot of them are at odds with each other until, you got to whack someone or start a war. Yes, sir.
At the risk of sounding too mechanical, why, I checked your book very quickly, I did not see an index. Why did you not put an index in your book?
Are you serious?
Yeah, I am serious.
Let me see my book.
An index at the back where, particular names of people. Maybe I didn't see it.
An index? Come on, son. What is this?
Table of contents. I'm talking about, let's say, if you had...
I can't read, so I'm...
If you had in that, let's say...
No, I got... This is footnoted up the ass, man. What are you talking about?
At the end, is there an index in the...
324.
Okay. All right.
Take 2 more questions.
2 more questions. I'm sorry, I do go on. Yes, sir.
Yes, are you been on any big talk shows, or are they stonewalling you too?
Well, actually, that's a good question. I'm doing Piers Morgan on Thursday, but these other shows are, and some of them are my friends. I won't mention them because they're friends, but certain people don't want to hear what I have to say on this subject, but because it's true. And, yes.
I'm John Judge. I'm the director.
John Judge!
You know, right? Well, thanks.
You know John? John is a great researcher.
I'm the director of the National Coalition on Political Assassinations. We are the scholars and medical and forensic and ballistic experts and historians who've studied all these assassinations.
How did I do today?
You did good.
Okay, John, thanks.
You did better because you're a known celebrity and you're willing to talk about the truth, and that makes a difference.
Thank you.
And few are, unfortunately. And those who do talk the truth don't usually become celebrities.
Well, you're a star in my world.
But, we were responsible for the release of the JFK records. I was out on April the 4th at the King Memorial trying to get a new bill to release all the files on the life and death of Dr. Martin Luther King, which are still locked up by the government. And not all the Kennedy records are out yet.
I know, there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pages.
I was a friend for many, many years, decades, of the original hit list compiler, Penn Jones Jr.
One of my heroes. Pardon my grief.
He went from 1964 every year, and I went with him. And after he got sick, I continued to go out and do a moment of silence on the grassy knoll, and then to speak the truth about the assassination. This year, the mayor of Dallas, is closing off the entirety of Dealey Plaza.
I heard that.
And refusing to let us come and do our moment of silence. We'll go to court if we have to. We have a petition out. But we will, on June 10th, commemorate the speech, the last nail in his coffin that Kennedy gave at American University.
We all breathe the same air. We all live on the same planet.
Calling for an end to the Cold War and calling for an end to the
That was the nail. You're right.
Yeah, and we go to the American U. There's a plaque there, commemorate the speech, read some of it, and some of us meet. And then Dallas, November 22nd to 24th, we will be holding a national conference on all the assassinations. This is
In Dallas?
JFK.
You gonna go, Dick?
Right near the, Dick's been to them before.
Yeah, maybe we'll come this year. Well, I'll come with Dick.
We're continuing the fight to get the files loose and to get at the truth of these cases.
Thank you, John, for your work.
Show you our T-shirt for the grassy knoll if we ever get up there.
Ah!
We might have to
Oh, wow.
the Trinity River plane and come out of the manhole cover. 50 years of denial's enough. This is a Gene case.
Great. I got to get one of those before I leave.
All right.
John Judge. Thank you, John. John, of course, you know that in 1999, a jury in Tennessee found that the government was involved in the murder of Dr. King. And that was a trial. That was a jury. Yeah. One more?
Actually, I think.
He has a question.
Oh.
When are we going? We're going to go in like a couple of minutes. Okay, sweetie? Assis?
Okay, let me just jump up here just for a second.
Sure,
'cause
go ahead.
I got one more thing
I'm
I have to
sorry
do.
I go on so much. I would love to answer all these questions.
All right.
I'll have to come back.
We'd love to have you. Over here is where the signing's going to start. Come around there. But before you do that, I have to do one more thing.
What?
I have to give you the world-famous National Press Club mug.
Of all the awards I've received in my life, this is the latest.
Now we want Sergeant Munch to drink coffee out of this. We want to see this. You know, we want.
This will be on Munch's desk.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, we want it on Munch's desk.
I don't know if I can zoom in on it, but you'll see it.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you all so much.
We talked about that.
That would be blamed on a madman and negligence. I'm going to read from my own works now, because I got to earn my book Hit List. By the way, I just found out yesterday, made the New York Times bestseller list. Thank you. And the reason I mention is my last book, Dead Wrong, also made the New York Times bestseller list, and the New York Times does not review my books. So if I may say, fuck the New York Times. Pardon my French. Okay, we all know this is the 50th anniversary of the murder of our president. And one thing I feel that people lose sight of with the assassination and all the myths and theories, and a man died that day. And I think a lot of people lose sight of the fact. It's become almost like a pop culture thing. JFK, the grassy knoll, lone gunman. There are these catchphrases that diminish and marginalize the depth, the complexity, and the true meaning of what it meant to have our president's head exploded in broad daylight, and they got away with it. So I'm going to read from some of my stuff. Very little from the new book, because you got to buy the new book. Where were you on November 22nd, 1963? I can remember where I was, and I can prove it. I have witnesses.
My name is Heather Forsgren Weaver, and I'm the Vice Chair of the National Press Club's Book and Author Committee. And I'd like to welcome you all and thank you all for coming tonight to tonight's book wrap featuring Richard Belzer and his New York Times best-selling book, Hit List, an in-depth investigation into the mysterious deaths of witnesses to the JFK assassination. Mr. Belzer will be signing only books purchased tonight because it's a fundraiser for the National Press Club's Journalism Institute. So if you haven't bought your book yet, now would be a really good time to go out and get it. Before we begin, I've got a couple of housekeeping items we have to take care of. First of all, everybody take their cell phone out, make sure it's on silent. And now that everybody has silenced their cell phones so we don't have any interruptions later, let me tell you about a few of our upcoming book wraps. Buzz Aldrin plans to be here this Friday to discuss his book, Mission to Mars, My Vision for Space Exploration. Jessica Buchanan and Eric Lanmam are scheduled to be here on May 22nd to discuss Impossible Odds, the kidnapping of Jessica Buchanan and her dramatic rescue by SEAL Team 6. Walter Cronkite's grandson, Walter Cronkite IV, and I am pleased to welcome Richard Belzer to the National Press Club.
Dick Gregory, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Just to see Greg alone is worth the price of admission, don't you think? One of the most important, not just performer, but activists and advocates, and along with Lenny Bruce and Mort Saul, Mr. Gregory has redefined what comedy can do, and besides make us laugh. It can inform us, it can educate us, and it can make us think about who we are and how we treat other people, and still function as one of the funniest people. So that is one of the great gifts that Dick has, and he's partially responsible, don't arrest him, for me being in show business. He inspired me very early on. I'll just recall one story. The first time I saw Mr. Gregory was indelibly imprinted on the emulsion sheet of my mind. He came out on stage. This is on television. Came out, sat on a stool, lit up a cigarette, and said, "If you don't laugh, I may move in next door to you." And that was in the 50s.
Morris Isserman planned to be here on June 4th to discuss Cronkite's War, his World War II letters home. And last but certainly not least, on June 19th, we have scheduled Steve Barry for his new book, The King's Deception. If you are interested in receiving email notifications about upcoming book wraps, please sign up outside at the front table. Tonight's program will be structured as follows. I will introduce Mr. Belzer. He will speak for about 20 minutes, and then we will have a question and answer session before he signs the books. Okay, I'm done with the housekeeping. For more than 20 years, Richard Belzer has been known to most of us as Sergeant John Munch of Law and Order Special Victims Unit and Homicide Life on the Street. Mr. Belzer, or Sergeant Munch, has also appeared on a record-setting 10 different TV series, including The X-Files and Sesame Street. Before becoming Sergeant Munch, Belzer portrayed an LAPD detective on a Very Brady sequel and had other acting roles. Mr. Belzer is also a well-known stand-up comedian. But even after writing a whole slew of books, one might ask, can he write? The answer is most definitely yes, because before he was Sergeant Munch or a stand-up comedian, Mr. Belzer was a reporter for the Bridgeport, Connecticut Post and other Connecticut newspapers. So as one reporter to another.
So not only do we laugh at that, but it's a revelatory joke. It's a joke that gives us, we all can have an epiphany about that joke, because he told the truth, he made us laugh, and he made us think. And for that, we are forever grateful to Dick Gregory. I'm going to dare and talk about something he knows more about than I do, but you can school me if I'm wrong. Okay, there are those in positions of power who malign the pursuit of justice by intentionally associating the word conspiracy with the delirious hallucinations of unbalanced minds. Well, they're wrong. The real-world definition of conspiracy is simple: two or more persons agreeing to commit a crime. In short, they are everywhere, a constant component of daily events throughout our history, and are by no means the restless imaginings of an over-attentive audience. Now, I'm going to throw in some quotes here that I like. There was a book called Farewell America, written under a pseudonym by James Hepburn, which some people think was written by French intelligence. Right there? This is the quote from that book. President Kennedy's assassination was the work of magicians. It was a stage trick, complete with accessories and fake mirrors, and when the curtain fell, the actors and even the scenery disappeared. The plotters were correct when they guessed that their crime would be concealed by shadows and silence,